Have you ever been playing a video game and thought, this is just too goddamn hard? If you're actually good at games, then maybe not, but if you're bad, like me, you've probably encountered this situation more than once. Instead of throwing your controller at the wall and never playing the game again, what if I told you that you could just cheat? But Randy, I hear you say, cheating is wrong. Well, many video game accessory companies in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s certainly did not think so. If you're a millennial or elder Gen Z, such as myself, you likely remember the heyday of video game cheating devices, but their popularity has waned over the past decade, so those who are a bit newer to the gaming scene may be less familiar with them. So why don't we take a look back at the rise and fall of video game cheating devices? Before we get into it, let's take a closer look at what exactly cheating in video games entails. Cheating in games has existed for pretty much as long as games have been around. Cheating involves modifying a game's behavior, usually in order to make it easier by increasing the number of lives, giving the player more power, or allowing entire levels to be skipped, among other things. Cheats were actually initially used by developers as a way to playtest games more easily. A notable example is the Konami code, a cheat code present in many Konami games that can be enabled by pressing a series of buttons on the controller. It was first created by developer Kazuhisa Hashimoto in 1986 for the NES game Gradius because he found his own game too difficult to play. Also in the 80s, game trainers started to be developed by hacking groups. These were programs that were integrated straight into the game. Upon starting up the game, users would be prompted to choose which cheats they wanted to enable. One of the first physical cheating devices was the multiface, released in the 80s for home computers by the British company Romantic Robot, who apparently nowadays have shifted to publishing recordings of classical music. Most computer games during this era lacked the ability to save your game, so one of the things the multiface could do was capture the computer's memory at a certain point in time and dump it to external storage. The game could then be started back up exactly where you left off. Pressing the big red button on the device allowed it to replace the computer's operating system with its own, letting you directly edit the contents of a game's memory. You could enter cheat codes, then known as pokes, to alter various aspects of the game. This was when cheat codes began to be published in computer and gaming magazines. A couple of other cheat devices came out in the 80s, but we'll come back to those in a bit, so put a pin in it for now. Video essayists just love saying that. Getting into the 90s, cheating cartridges began to be produced for gaming consoles. Among the first of these was the Game Genie, created by British game developers Codemasters and distributed by major toy company Louis Galoob Toys. The first version was released in 1990 for the NES, and was followed by versions for the SNES, Game Boy, Sega Genesis, and Game Gear. It was heavily marketed and became extremely popular, selling over 5 million units. I love this extremely 90s TV ad for it.
Game over? No way! Cause we got Game Genie! We tell you when it's over.
With Game Genie, I decide how many lives I get.
I use it when I want to live forever.
Play to the end and win. Maybe I want to start on level 15.
No problemo!
It makes cool games like Street Fighter 2 more exciting.
That's frustrating! With Game Genie, it ain't over. So we say it's over. Excellent!
Game Genie for NES, Super NES, Sega Genesis, and Game Boy. Codes for many popular games, each sold separately.
The way the Game Genie worked was by inserting the cartridge into the slot on your console and then inserting the game cartridge into it. Upon starting the console, players could enter between 3 and 6 cheat codes depending on the version they were using that would either manipulate aspects of the game or grant access to unused assets and functions. The Genesis version of the device could even be used to get around region locking of games. The Game Genie came with a booklet of codes, and they also introduced a subscription service to obtain new codes, as well as publishing codes in magazines. However, since this device obviously wasn't intended by game developers to be used with their products, there was a risk of it causing some problems, which is a theme that we'll see going forward. For instance, the NES version of the Game Genie put stress on both the console and the game cartridge due to the weight attached to them, which could cause damage. The SNES version was incompatible with some games like Star Fox, because their cartridges used pins that went unused in most other games. The Game Genie ended up being dropped by Galoob sometime in the 90s, and no new versions were ever produced. However, it lives on today as software that comes built into many emulators, now allowing for unlimited codes to be input. The fall of the Game Genie paved the way for its competitors to reach new heights. I'm going to be talking now about two cheating devices that started off very similar to one another but diverged as time went on. The GameShark was a line of cheating cartridges and discs initially developed by UK-based company Detail, who some of you may know as the makers of the Action Replay. What you may not know is that the GameShark actually started out as just an Action Replay rebranded for the American market by distributor Interact. I guess they thought GameShark sounded cooler for the macho, action-loving, gun-toting Americans or something, I don't know. Interact's parent company ended up going bankrupt in the 2000s, and GameShark was sold to Mad Catz Interactive, no longer affiliated with Detail, who by this time were distributing their products in North America as Action Replay. The GameShark was initially released for the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation in 1996, followed by versions for the Nintendo 64, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, PlayStation 2, Dreamcast, Xbox, and some Windows PCs. This device took the features of the beloved Game Genie and improved upon them. It came with 4,000 codes preloaded and allowed users to easily create their own codes because it followed a logical hexadecimal format, rather than the Game Genie's format, which obfuscated the codes, meaning users could only find new ones through trial and error. The codes were also stored in the onboard flash memory so they could be accessed later instead of having to be re-entered each time. The GameShark could also double as an additional memory card for some consoles with a greater storage capacity than what was offered by official memory cards, and could bypass region locking on the N64. It ended up exploding in popularity and was everywhere for a while. They released a product called SharkWire Online that came with a modem and keyboard that allowed users to connect to a special network where they could download cheat codes and access exclusive content. They even had their own gaming magazine. The GameShark didn't come without its fair share of problems, though. Some versions had a bare cartridge connector instead of a slot, which meant cartridges could be easily bent out of place while playing, potentially damaging them. It used buggy and incorrect methods of writing to its internal memory, which caused it to occasionally corrupt the code list, or even the software itself, and could render the device unusable. Some even complained that the device was made of cheap plastic and fell apart easily. It was also easily detectable by some games, and many N64 games would prevent the game from running or erase the save file if a GameShark was detected. GameShark products haven't been sold for some time now, and the brand seems to be defunct, with Mad Catz going out of business in 2017. Despite this, it will forever be remembered for the market left on the gaming industry. If you're interested in a more in-depth look at the history of the GameShark specifically, Wrestling with Gaming has a whole video on it that I will link in the description. We now come to my personal favorite cheating device, the Action Replay, which is also probably the most recognizable one to people around my age. Action Replay devices were created as far back as the 80s by the previously mentioned Detail. The first devices were for home computers such as the Commodore 64 and Amiga, with a device called the Snapshot 64 being the precursor to what would become the Action Replay. They later broke into the console market and created devices for a wide range of consoles, including the NES, Sega Master System, Genesis, Saturn and Dreamcast, SNES, PlayStation 1 and 2, N64, Xbox, GameCube, Wii, every version of the Game Boy, the Nintendo DS, DSi, and 3DS, and PSP. In the 90s, the Action Replay was in fierce competition with the other big player in the cheating device industry at the time, the Game Genie. The makers of the Game Genie tried to stifle the competition by filing a patent for video game cheat cartridges, but Detail had actually been making these devices longer than they had. The Game Genie was initially winning this competition because they had the marketing power of a large company behind them, but eventually it was dropped and the Action Replay continued on. As we know, AR products were initially sold under the GameShark name in North America before being sold under their own name. I couldn't find any actual sales metrics, but I feel like the most popular version of the Action Replay was for the Nintendo DS family of consoles, which was the version I had. This would make sense given the DS is the second best-selling console of all time behind the PS2 and the best-selling handheld console of all time. Whereas most cheat cartridges have you insert the device into the console and then the game cart into the device, the earlier versions of the DS Action Replay had you insert the device, start up your console, select the desired cheats, and then swap in your game. You could also connect the device directly to your computer using a cable to download codes. As with the devices we've discussed previously, the AR did run the risk of messing up your save file or even the device itself breaking. Speaking from personal experience here. For example, I mostly used my action replay with the Gen 4 Pokemon games, and certain cheats in these games, notably the one-hit KO cheat, could cause something called a bad egg to appear in your party. These are basically glitch eggs that don't hatch into a Pokemon. They won't completely mess up your save file or anything, but they can take up a slot in your box or party and can only be gotten rid of through trading. The Action Replay is actually one of the few cheating devices that's still available today and continues to be supported by Detail. And before we move on, I just want to take a moment to appreciate the scuffed knockoff Pokemon on the box art for the Action Replay DS. Dialga and Chimchar look okay, but Piplup and Palkia kind of look like something that came out of Chernobyl. The Game Genie, GameShark, and Action Replay were sort of the big three of the cheating device industry, but I did want to briefly go over a couple of other honorable mentions. First, we have the Exploder and the Codebreaker, developed by Pelican Accessories. The Exploder was available in PAL regions and had devices for most of the usual consoles. However, it was also available for 7th gen consoles such as the PS3, Xbox 360, and Wii, while most other brands were not. In the 2010s, they also released a software version for the PS4 that was available as a free download. The Codebreaker was developed as a North American counterpart to the Exploder and came with a USB stick to download and import codes from the internet. Both of these devices were also compatible with GameShark and Action Replay Pro codes. Cheating devices have largely died out by now, but there is one device that came out a few years ago for the Nintendo Switch called the Switch Up. It's a USB stick that plugs into the port on the Switch dock. Its main purpose is actually to act as a way to connect non-Switch controllers to the console, but it does allow users to cheat in a small number of games, including Pokemon Sword and Shield, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Mario Odyssey, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and Fortnite, and Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl for an extra $20 for some reason. So that brings us to the present day. One thing you may have been wondering throughout the video is, how the fuck is any of this legal? I often wondered the same thing before making this. I mean, it's not like these were some shady underground thing. I would walk into Zeller's as a kid and go stare at all the video games behind the glass, as you do, and there'd be a display of Action Replays for sale right there. Well, as it turns out, Nintendo did try to sue Galoob, the distributors of the Game Genie, in the early 90s. Because of course they did. This actually led to sales of the Game Genie being halted in America for a period of time. However, Nintendo ended up losing the case. They tried to claim that the Game Genie created derivative works, and were therefore in violation of copyright law, even though that's not what they did at all. There are no laws against modifying software that is owned by the modifier under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which leaves cheating devices to exist in a bit of a legal gray area. Nintendo are probably still coping and seething over that one. On the other hand, Sega fully endorsed the Game Genie and even gave their official seal of approval. Kinda based of them. Others also question the dubious ethics of cheating in video games. The companies behind these devices seem to be aware of this perception, as most of them marketed their products as game enhancers rather than cheating devices. As I alluded to at the beginning of the video, we've been taught all our lives that cheating is bad. Cheating devices are banned from competitions for obvious reasons, and are heavily frowned upon in the online gaming scene, since it can give a player unfair advantages that other players don't have. Some people, including my own parents, argue that cheating defeats the point of the game and sucks all the fun out of it. 10-year-old me definitely disagreed with that one. If anything, cheating made the game more fun to me. Nothing has ever given me a thrill quite like being able to catch another trainer's Pokemon. Cheating devices can also grant access to content that was only available for a limited time, such as the mythical Pokemon giveaway events that only lasted for 1 minute on a blood moon at this very specific Toys R Us location in Butte, Montana. One of my favorite Action Replay memories is when my brother was using the walk-through walls cheat in Pokemon Platinum and accidentally found Shaman, a Pokemon that we didn't even know existed at the time. It felt cool to be able to discover all this hidden content and experience the game in a new way. I've read some anecdotes that say that learning to create codes on the GameShark got them interested in computer science and shaped their future career. Or if you had one of those weird parents that thought Pokemon was satanic or whatever, they probably refused to buy you a cheating device because cheating is a sin or something. I don't know. I haven't read the Bible. As mentioned previously, physical cheating devices aren't really a thing anymore, with most present-day cheating being done using software. This is due to a shift towards online gaming and the online connectivity of consoles. One update to your PS5 and that cheating disc is useless. I have a lot of fond memories of messing around with my action replay though, and I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences, so I think this is a history that should be preserved. As always, thank you so much for watching. This was a bit of a more technical video, and I am not a woman in STEM, so I apologize if I got anything wrong. Computer nerds, feel free to yell at me in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, liking and subscribing would be very much appreciated. I'll catch y'all in the next one.